So turning to California, in June, we said there were signs of slowing growth, but not slowing growth. In September, we said the same thing, more signs of slowing. Now we're actually seeing the slowing as we go into the next decade. And so I want to talk about that and talk about those aspects of California that would lead us to a forecast that's maybe a little different from the US forecast. And to do that, I want to talk about the logistics industry and tourism and housing, and then dig a little deeper into employment and GDP, and in particular the tech sector, which is a sector, it's actually multiple sectors, that have been really driving California growth through the last decade. So let's begin with logistics and trade through our seaports. So this is Oakland and the two large ports of Southern California, and the graph that you see in front of you is the year-over-year change in total goods movement. So that's exports and imports. And the blue blocks there are increases, year-over-year increases, and except for one small red, it's all increases all the way up until you get to January of 2019, and then it's all red, right? So the trade wars seem to be having an impact on trade through our ports, through our seaports. The same is true with trade through the airports. So on the left-hand side here are imports and exports by air through LAX. The top line is imports. Bottom line is exports. These are international imports and exports. And you notice you have a positive trend going all the way up, and then it turns beginning of 2019 and starts declining, both imports and exports. So what's going on there in the ports, in the seaports and airports? Well, we know that we have tariffs. Tariffs are raising the relative price of imports. We also have a stronger dollar, raising. We have a stronger dollar, which raises the price of our exports. We have retaliatory tariffs from China, which is affecting our exports, and weaker growth in the world economy. All of those things are factoring into less goods movement through airports and seaports internationally. But on the right-hand side here, you see two lines. The red line is Ontario Airport. The blue is Oakland. That's domestic trade. And so that's a lot of that is package movement through UPS and FedEx. And you don't really see the same scaling back, and maybe a slowing down, but not the negative trends. There may be kind of one starting to happen in the Bay Area, but it's not enough to call it a trend yet. And importantly, the logistics industry and the growth in the logistics industry has been because of a shift to online shopping. And we see, at the beginning of this holiday season, that shift continues. So if you look at employment in this sector, this is logistics employment, 2018 on the left, 2019 on the right. We have an upward trend. We still have an upward trend. It's a little bit slower, right? So the trade wars, stronger dollar, weaker foreign economies are all having an impact, but they're not turning it negative, just slowing. Turning now to tourism, what you see here are international arrivals at LAX on the top, SFO on the bottom, and there's a discrepancy in the dates here. So San Francisco is only through September, Los Angeles is through October. But you see, at least on the top in Los Angeles, it looks to be flattening out. One important component of tourism in California comes from Chinese tourists. Now, in China, they issued a warning about coming to the United States, in which they said, if you go to the United States, you're going to be harassed at the airport. You may be harassed after you get into the country. And anyway, it's a dangerous place. They have like these random shootings everywhere. So you might think about going elsewhere. So when we get a travel warning from the US government, we go, oh, cool, let's go there and see what's happening. That's not so in China. When they get a travel warning, they pay attention. And so we're seeing diminished tourism from China. But on the other hand, when the world's a more dangerous place, American households vacation at home. California is a great vacation destination. and so we've got that offset. The other offset that we have in leisure and hospitality is that we have a growing economy. That means we're eating out more, and we're availing ourselves of more services from leisure and hospitality. I'm going to show you an employment graph a little later on this, but those things tend to balance out, and we've had growth in that sector, actually. So turning to housing, we've talked about this, I think, in each time. The average number of single-family new homes sold per month in California from 2015 to 2017 was 420,000. And then you see over here at the end of 2017 through 2018, that drops below that blue dashed line, which is at 420, and then kind of comes back up. And that's with the reduction in the SALT deduction for income taxes, so that's at least part of that. Then we have a generalized softening, partially due to increased interest rates, but all of that decline, and this happened elsewhere. And David showed you that chart for the US. So during part of that decline, we had increasing interest rates, but part of the decline, we had decreasing interest rates. And then it finally kind of turns around. So when you've got a market where you have contracting sales, it's really hard to make the case to start developing new properties. Now that's increased, it looks like we've got a new average level, which is about 20,000 less than we had in those previous years, but it looks actually fairly stable at that lower level. So that's good for housing markets in the sense that developers can begin to make a business plan. Similarly, with prices, on the left-hand side, what you see is the median home price, and it dips with that dip in sales. It comes back up, pretty much stabilizes. The right-hand side are the Case-Shiller home price indices for San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. And again, what you see there is you see a dip, and now you've got a little bit of price appreciation. So if you have stable sales and some price appreciation, that should lead to more building. And that's exactly what we see in this chart, which is permits for new homes. So about half of these are single-family detached homes. Half of them are homes that, so this is the number of units, are homes that are in multifamily buildings. And you see it dips down, as we would expect. It comes back up now, not to where it was before, but we have increased building. And this, again, is consistent with what's happening in the US. But if we look at the run rate for building new homes in California, it's now at 115,000 homes per year. And if you subtract out those homes that are being rebuilt after these natural disasters, these wildfires, it's much less. If you just look at the annual permitting in Sonoma County and Butte County, now some of that's not rebuilding, but just that annual permitting, you get a few thousand that you take off of this. We're very far away from making even a dent in the affordability issue in California, the housing affordability issue. And when we look at, for example, Sonoma County, they've issued, since the fires that went through Coffey Park, they've issued about 7,000 permits, but they haven't built 7,000 homes. So permitting has been easy, but there's another constraint, and the constraint is seen here. It's in construction employment. So we are now up to, we've had a growth in construction employment. That's been part of the growth of California in the last year. And we're now up to about 915,000 construction employees. And at the peak in 2006, we had 950,000. So we're running out of people. And that's really the problem in Sonoma County. Unemployment rate's 2.6%. Where are they going to get the people to build those 7,000 homes? And so we have a supply constraint. So it's not just regulatory constraints. Now we have a supply constraint here. And the idea that the private sector is going to take us out of the housing affordability crisis anytime soon is kind of fantasy when you're confronted with these kinds of constraints. But it means slowing in construction employment. And so that leads us to looking at GDP. So what you see in this graph is the monthly GDP that we calculate, the Bureau of Economic Analysis in Washington calculates a quarterly GDP, which they give to us about 9 months after the fact, which makes it historically interesting but not very useful. So we calculate a monthly GDP, and you see in 2017, going from 2017 to 2019, we've got a decline in GDP. There's a downward trend. But in the last couple of months, the last 4 months there, it sort of bumps up. And part of that is that we've had an increase in hiring in California in the last 4 months. And I want to dig into that and see what that says about moving into the next decade, and are we really going to be slowing? And to do that, let's look at the first part of the year, that's the blue blocks here, and the second part of this year, 2019, that's the, I guess they're yellow-orange blocks. And so this is net new additions by sector. So for example, on the left-hand side is healthcare and social services, construction, and professional, scientific, and technical services, the latter being one of our big tech sectors. So those three were the growth areas in the first part of 2019. And then you look and you see the yellow blocks are all less than that. And in fact, professional, scientific, and technical services has gone negative. So I want to speak to that in a moment. What's been growing more than in the second half relative to the first? Leisure and hospitality. We just talked about that. Administrative services, that's where temp workers are. Finance, part of that is due to lower mortgage interest rates and refinancing, maybe a big part of that. State and local government, which is derivative of tax revenues, and private education, which usually is fairly stable, but we got a big bump in private education. And so what we want to do is kind of look behind this, and to set the scene here, just take a look at healthcare and social services. So the blue block is higher than the yellow one. More jobs were added in the first half than in the second half, even though in the second half jobs were added. So that difference there between the two represents a decline in the number of jobs that were added of 6,700 jobs. It's not a decline in number of jobs, it's a decline in the number of jobs that are added, right? So we're adding jobs in that sector at a slower rate. And now I want to kind of parse that out by productivity by sector to give us a picture of what's going to happen with GDP. So this is productivity by sector, information, non-durable goods manufacturing, durable goods manufacturing, and so on, each sector going across. The blue are sectors where the second half job production, net new jobs, was greater than the first half. The red, second half net new jobs less than the first half. And that one yellow, durable goods manufacturing, it's been about the same, right? So if we look at the first five, the highest productivity sectors, what we find is they are producing jobs. It's still positive, but they're producing jobs at a rate of about 3,000 jobs per month less than they were in the first half. In the middle section, which is government, retail, construction, and health and social services, 8,000 less than in the first half. Still positive, but 8,000 less than in the first half. And the lower productivity, which are also lower wage jobs, plus 20,000. And that's where you get that increase that you saw in job growth in California. It's in the lower productivity, it's in the lower wage jobs, education, temp workers, and leisure and hospitality. So all of that suggests, again, slower growth going into the next decade. So last thing that I want to cover is this tech sector, because it's been so important to California's growth. There are two lines here. The dark line is output or value added. The yellow line is employment. The scales are proportionate. There's a left and right scale, but they're proportionate to each other. And this is professional, scientific, and technical services on your left, information on the right. And so what you see is, if you move your eyes over to the right-hand side of the graphs, you see a slowdown to actually slightly negative. This really corresponds to both the slowdown in exports and also, as David talked about, the slowdown in in business investment. We don't expect that to last as the economy starts growing as we move into 2021. This tech sector is going to rebound, but at least for now, as we move into 2020 and the first part of the next decade, this is going to contribute to our slower growth. So that brings us to some key indicators for the forecast. We have fourth quarter to fourth quarter growth in payroll jobs of 1% in the coming year and 0.7% the year thereafter, 2021. The unemployment rate at 4.3%, but this slowing economy with a growing labor force means that at the end of 2020, the unemployment rate is going to bump up. That'll carry into 2021, but by the end of 2021, we have an unemployment rate that's back down at 4.4%. So it's a little bit higher than what we have today, but still not that far away from full employment. And housing, we're expecting about 118,000 units in the next year. And then finally, we'll be augmenting the construction labor force and be able to get that up to 128,000, still way far away from making a dent in affordability. And so let me leave you with, since you all came out on a rainy day, our second or third rain of the year, with a picture of snow in the grapevine. You didn't have to contend with that coming in. And kind of the image here is of these cars and trucks slowly going up the grapevine, kind of similar to California going into the next decade, growing sort of slowly, but everybody's driven the grapevine. As soon as you get to the top, you really start going fast again. That's what we expect to happen as we move to the latter part of 2021. And that concludes the California forecast. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ed Leamer to talk about the question that's on everyone's mind, which is recession. Thank you.